Brahma Nimantanika Sutta, the Brahma Invitation, Majjhima Nikaya, MN 49. Reading from thammatalks.org, Talks, Writings and Translations of Thanissaro Bhikkhu, Wednesday, December 14th, 2022. Introduction. In this sutta, the Buddha faces two antagonists, Baka, a Brahma who believes that his Brahma attainment is the highest attainment there is, and Mara, who wants 1. To keep Baka under his power by allowing Baka to maintain his deluded opinion, and 2. To prevent the Buddha from sharing his awakened knowledge with others. Of the two, Mara is the more insidious, a point illustrated by the fact that Mara always speaks through someone else and never directly shows his face. Another interesting point is illustrated by the fact that Mara is the source of the demand that one obey a creator god. In overcoming his antagonists, the Buddha asserts the superiority of his knowledge in two major fashions: through a description of his awakened knowledge and through a display of psychic powers. The Buddha describes his awakened knowledge in a variety of ways: by identifying Mara whenever he possesses an attendant of Baka's assembly, by describing the full extent of Baka's power, by identifying levels of being that Baka does not know, by describing an awakened consciousness that is not known by means of any of the six senses at all, by asserting an awareness that avoids delight in both becoming and the quest for non-becoming, and by asserting that he has abandoned all possible conditions that would lead to future rebirth. Some of these assertions, in particular the assertion of a consciousness not mediated by any of the six senses, are extremely important Dhamma lessons, which are further explained in the notes. But as the sutta shows, even the Buddha's description of these teachings was not enough to win over Baka or the members of his following. They were convinced only when the Buddha then performed a feat of psychic power that 1. Even Baka could not fathom, and 2. Illustrated the Buddha's major point. Up to then, in identifying Mara and the range of Baka's power, the Buddha was in effect saying, I see you, but you don't see me. With his display of psychic power, in which Brahma and his following could not see him but could hear his voice, he demonstrated his point in such graphic terms that Baka and his following were immediately won over. In this way, the protagonists of this sutta react in a way very different from that of a typical modern reader. We at present, when reading this sutta, may be more impressed with the Buddha's explanation of his awakened knowledge than we are with the account of his display of psychic power. For after all, both aspects of the sutta, the description of the Buddha's knowledge and the description of his psychic power, are for us just that, descriptions. But for those who witnessed it, his display of power was an undeniable fact that went beyond words. They saw him go beyond their range. Prior to that display, they regarded his claims of knowledge simply as that, mere claims. When he showed, however, that he could perform a miracle that even Baka could not perform, they were forced to concede his superiority. Thus, this sutta imparts a lesson often forgotten at present, that the Buddha taught not only by word but also by example, and that some of his examples required a dimension of power that even the gods could not match. Strictly speaking, of course, the Buddha's display of power did not prove that he had gone beyond becoming. After all, in becoming invisible to Baka, he may simply have gone to another level of becoming of which Baka was unaware. However, the Buddha correctly surmised that a display of power would subdue the pride of his listeners, awaken a sense of conviction in his attainment, and thus enable them to enter the path of practice. As he states in MN 27, only when one sees the Four Noble Truths, usually a synonym for stream entry, is one's conviction in the Buddha's awakening confirmed. Only when one puts an end to one's mental effluence does one have firm proof of the Buddha's awakening. The Buddha notes in DN11 that a display of psychic powers can sometimes backfire, in that one's audience might assume that one is engaging in cheap magic tricks. Thus, instead of inspiring conviction, the display simply increases doubt. Nevertheless, there are other instances in the canon, most notably in the story of the Kasapa brothers, MVI.1522, and that of Angulimala, MN 86, where the Buddha was able to display his powers to good effect. But because he could not trust even his Arahant disciples to possess his same sense of when such powers would work and when they would backfire, he forbade his disciples from displaying psychic powers to lay people. See CVV8 Buddhist Monastic Code, Volume 2, Chapter 10. The conclusion of the sutta states that the sutta's name comes from two facets of the story. The fact that it contains an invitation from a Brahma when Baka welcomes the Buddha to his realm, and from the silencing of Mara. The first point is clear enough, but the second requires explanation. It is a play on the word Brahma, which is not only a noun denoting the highest levels of devas, but also an adjective meaning of great or high power. The Buddha's last statement, in which he declares his freedom from rebirth, is something of an invitation to Mara. Mara is welcome to refute it if he can. Up to that point, Mara has phrased his threats to the Buddha in terms of the fortunate rebirths the Buddha will experience if he obeys Mara's advice, and the unfortunate ones he will experience if he doesn't. Now that the Buddha declares, in a way that Mara cannot refute, that he has abandoned all possible conditions for rebirth, Mara has nothing more on which to base his threats. Thus, he is left speechless. In this way, the Buddha's last statement is a Brahma invitation, a statement that anyone is welcome to refute, but of such great power that no one can refute it at all. I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi in Jetta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. There he addressed the monks. Monks? Yes, Lord, the monks responded to him. The Blessed One said, on one occasion recently, I was staying in Ukatha in the Subhaga forest at the root of a royal sal tree. Now, on that occasion, an evil viewpoint had arisen to Baka Brahma. This is constant, this is permanent, this is eternal, this is total. This is not subject to falling away, for this does not take birth, does not age, does not die, does not fall away, does not reappear, and there is no other higher escape. So I, having known with my awareness the line of thinking in Baka Brahma's awareness, as a strong man would extend his flexed arm or flex his extended arm, vanished into the root of the royal sal tree in the Subhaga forest in Ukatha and appeared in that Brahma world. Baka Brahma saw me coming in the distance and, on seeing me, said, come, good sir, you are welcome, good sir. It has been long, good sir, since you arranged to come here. For this, good sir, is constant. This is permanent. This is eternal. This is total. This is not subject to falling away. For here one does not take birth, does not age, does not die, does not fall away, does not reappear, and there is no other higher escape. When this was said, I told Baka Brahma, how immersed in ignorance is Baka Brahma? How immersed in ignorance is Baka Brahma? In that what is actually inconstant he calls constant. What is actually impermanent he calls permanent. What is actually non-eternal he calls eternal. What is actually partial, he calls total. What is actually subject to falling away, he calls not subject to falling away. Where one takes birth, ages, dies, falls away, and reappears, he says, for here one does not take birth, does not age, does not die, does not fall away, does not reappear. And there being another higher escape, he says, there is no other higher escape. Then Mara, the evil one, taking possession of an attendant of the Brahma assembly, said to me, Monk, monk, don't attack him, don't attack him. For this Brahma, monk, is the great Brahma, the conqueror, the unconquered, the all seeing, all powerful, the sovereign Lord, the maker, creator, chief, appointer, and ruler, Father of all that have been and shall be. There were, monk, before your time, contemplatives and Brahmans in the world, who found fault with earth and were disgusted with earth, who found fault with liquid and were disgusted with liquid, who found fault with fire and were disgusted with fire, who found fault with wind and were disgusted with wind, who found fault with beings and were disgusted with beings, who found fault with devas and were disgusted with devas, who found fault with Pajapati and were disgusted with Pajapati, who found fault with Brahma and were disgusted with Brahma. They, with the breakup of the body, with the cutting off of life, were established in a coarse body. There were, monk, before your time, contemplatives and Brahmans in the world, who praised earth and were delighted with earth, who praised liquid and were delighted with liquid, who praised fire and were delighted with fire, who praised wind and were delighted with wind, who praised beings and were delighted with beings, who praised devas and were delighted with devas, who praised Pajapati and were delighted with Pajapati, who praised Brahma and were delighted with Brahma. They, with the breakup of the body, with the cutting off of life, were established in a refined body. So I tell you, monk, please, good sir, do only as Brahma says. Do not defy the word of Brahma. If you defy the word of Brahma, then, as a man, when the goddess of fortune approaches, chases her away with a stick, or as a man, falling into hell, loses hold of the earth with his hands and feet, that will be what you have accomplished. Please, good sir, do only as Brahma says. Do not defy the word of Brahma. Don't you see that Brahma's assembly has gathered? And so Mara the evil one directed my attention to Brahma's assembly. When this was said, I told Mara the evil one, I know you, evil one. Don't assume he does not know me. You are Mara, evil one, and Brahma and Brahma's assembly, and the attendants of Brahma's assembly have all come into your hands. They have all come under your sway, and you think, this one too has come into my hands, has come under my sway. But, evil one, I have neither come into your hands, nor have I come under your sway.